Welcome to the Brilliant Fertility Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Katie Rose, and this podcast exists to help illuminate the path ahead of you. With expert interviews, clinical pearls, and real client success stories, my intention is to bring you hope for what's possible on this journey and to give you tools and resources to navigate the ups and downs on the road before you. If you find this podcast helpful, don't forget to subscribe on your favorite listening platform. And I have a big request. If you have a minute, can you leave us a 5-star review? And let us know, what did you learn? What did you come away with? Did you leave with that spark of hope? This helps more people like you find the podcast. My mission is to support as many humans as possible on their path to become parent. And by you sharing and subscribing, you're part of that mission too. And I'm so grateful for you for being here. Hello. Welcome to episode 1. I want to kick this podcast off by talking about perfection and our need for perfectionism and how this might actually be holding us back, not just in life, but on the fertility journey. Now, perfection is something that so many of us have strived for. I know that I would qualify myself as a recovering perfectionist. If my husband sees me organizing my closet by color and sleeve length, he knows to ask some deeper questions about what might be going on. It's definitely a coping mechanism. And while perfectionism may have taken you to a certain point, it's pretty safe to say that if you're listening to this podcast, if you are already struggling with fertility, that what got you here isn't going to be what gets you to the next phase. It's not going to be what gets you to that positive pregnancy test. So I want to just kick this whole thing off with giving you permission to release perfectionism. You don't have to have a perfect looking menstrual cycle. You don't have to take your supplements perfectly. There's really nothing that is required of you to do perfectly on this journey in order for things to quote unquote work out. Now, I wish I could guarantee you a baby. I wish I could guarantee you that all of your dreams would come true. I wish I had that magic wand. And yet, no one can make any such guarantees. There's so many things in life that are uncertain, and that's part of what drives us to do things perfectly, I believe. Like, this is one thing that we can control so that maybe we can control the outcome. So I just want to take that into consideration and have you getting curious around where perfectionism might come from in your world, where you might be trying to do things perfectly in order to control an outcome that you don't truly have control over. I know, we went there fast. We got into the deep weeds pretty quickly here, but fertility struggles are deep. Like, this is something that will likely have you questioning your entire purpose in life, your reason for being. And if there's one thing that I could, energetically free up for you right off the bat, it's perfectionism. And you'll also notice that there's a lot about this podcast that won't be perfect. This is intentional. This is for my own well-being and yours, so that you can see that perfectionism isn't necessary anywhere. Excellence is great. I absolutely strive for excellence in my own medical practice, in the care that my patients receive, and the care that my clients in the Brilliant Fertility Program receive, and as much as possible in every area of life. And I also see where perfectionism held me back in so many ways. I was a straight A, type A student. I worked my butt off. I burnt the candle at both ends, so to speak, for so much of my life. And when I look at the period of my life when I came off of birth control and I didn't get a period for months at a time. And I started to develop so much fear around not being able to have children. There was so much that I was still trying to do perfectly. And I know for me that that ramped up the level of anxiety that I was experiencing, the number of sleepless nights that I was experiencing. It wasn't great for my nervous system. And now knowing how important the nervous system is and how important regulation is for our reproductive hormones and for our body to feel safe to conceive, there's so much that I wish I had done differently. And yet I also know and trust that everything led me up to this moment. And it all had its own purpose in its own way that I could learn from, even if some of it felt really shitty at the time. So I invite you to get present to where you experience perfectionism in your life. I invite you to get curious around where you are requiring perfection from yourself in a way that it would just be impossible to feel like you're succeeding. I'll give an example. With the menstrual cycle, so many of my clients come in being very critical of what their menstrual cycle looks like. Now, the menstrual cycle is a vital sign. It's important. It tells us, are you ovulating regularly? What's the internal health picture as displayed by the color of blood, clotting, pain, premenstrual symptoms? These are important. And there are so many things in the lifestyle that we do have influence over when it comes to how the menstrual cycle presents. Inflammation and blood sugar and stress and environmental toxins. But we don't have control of what that's going to show up as every cycle. So to get really hard on yourself over your period coming a day early or having spotting for a couple of days or having PMS or ovulation happening a couple days early is just so unfair to you. I want to invite you to be easier on yourself, to see where you can release some of that self-criticism and know that it's possible to get pregnant with an imperfect cycle. Now, we want to make sure that we've laid the groundwork for health and for well-being and for vitality. And sometimes that means taking a few months of being really intentional with nutrition and nourishment and self-care and regulating the nervous system. That's super helpful. And still, some people's cycles aren't going to look textbook perfect. There's really no such thing as this textbook perfect cycle. There's actually only 13% of the population who ovulates on cycle day 14. So I hope that also gives you a little bit of a relief. You can let go of that attachment to needing to ovulate on a certain day. There are certain vital criteria that we want to look at, and I'll be discussing this more in an upcoming fertility virtual retreat. So just take a moment to check the show notes. Go ahead and sign up for that retreat right now, because in day one, I will be talking about what are the 4 absolutely necessary things for conception to occur from the physical element. I'm not going to go too deeply into that today, but obviously ovulation is important. It's important to have a luteal phase that's long enough so that implantation can occur successfully. But perfection, this isn't necessary, you guys. This might be TMI, but I think a lot of you will appreciate this and maybe get some hope from this, that I actually conceived my son on about cycle day 40. My cycles were wildly irregular when I came off birth control. I was initially diagnosed with PCOS. I'm still to this day not convinced that that was an accurate diagnosis. I think we were dealing more with like this post-birth control syndrome type picture. But for me, 3 years after I stopped birth control, I still had fairly irregular cycles. It was difficult to track when ovulation was occurring. I couldn't have told you what my own personal cervical fluid looked like. And yet it happened. I conceived and I had a healthy baby. And this has happened for so many of my clients and my patients over the years, where I now know that we can release the perfectionism around what your cycle looks like. You can release the perfectionism over your supplement. I even like to think that, if you're pretty good about it, 5 days a week, and there's 2 days a week where maybe you forget or you just feel like, ugh, the thought of taking these right now just makes me want to vom. Maybe that's actually your body saying, we don't need these today. We're good. Maybe that's an element that can actually help you increase the trust in yourself. I actually had one instructor in my traditional Chinese medicine herbalism classes who thoroughly believed that if you forgot to take your herbs for a day, it was because you did not need them. So instead of layering on the guilt of like, oh my God, I forgot to take my supplements, this means XYZ, this cycle's not going to work. This isn't going to happen. This is why I ovulated too early and I missed it. No, sometimes the body is just going to do things that we couldn't quite control. We do the best with what we have. Or actually, this is part of what the unconscious is geared towards. Is the unconscious is always doing the best with what you have right now. You are always doing the best you can. Maybe you just take a big deep breath around that. Maybe repeat after me if it feels good. I am always doing the best with what I can. I do not need to be perfect. This release of perfectionism is something that my clients have observed frees up so much energy for them. There's so much mentally occurring when you're trying to do things perfectly. Like, what could you be doing with that energy instead? What could you be enjoying that you haven't allowed yourself to enjoy in a while? That could be freed up as you release perfectionism. So that's my invitation. In the next episode, I'm going to be talking more about what my own personal journey looked like coming off of birth control, being diagnosed with amenorrhea and PCOS, and eventually being able to conceive my 2 healthy children. And let me know what you learned in this episode, what came through for you. I love hearing from our listeners. And don't forget to sign up for the virtual fertility retreat happening next month. And check the show notes for all the details. We'll be taking you through 3 days of an educational and empowering experience to improve your fertility naturally.